Welcome to Inside Seaweed, the podcast looking deep into the seaweed industry through the stories of pioneers, entrepreneurs, and innovators. I'm Fed the Gobby, and on the show today I talk to the founder of Phyconomy, Steven Hermans. He's been on a learning journey and a mission to improve the flow of information in the seaweed industry. Phyconomy is currently doing so through a blog, a newsletter, a database of seaweed organizations, and an annual report called State of the Seaweed Industry, which has been referenced on newspapers like the Financial Times, academic papers, and policy papers such as Seaweed For Europe. I'll link to all of these very useful resources in the show notes, but now please enjoy my wide-ranging conversation with Steven Hermans. All right, Steven, welcome to the show. Great to have you here.
Thank you.
I'll just go straight into something I read about you, which is that for more than 10 years, you worked in the tourism industry, focusing on Central Asia, the Silk Road. You have featured as an expert in news outlets such as The Guardian, The New York Times, The Telegraph. So this seems a bit off topic, but bear with me. What have you learned and taken away during that period that is still relevant today in your work on seaweed?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, I think first thing I learned is that there's an audience for anything, and so yeah, it's definitely I like these kinds of niche subjects like travel in Central Asia or the seaweed industry, because there's nobody else working on it, so it feels like okay, here's something or some place where one person who doesn't know anything can maybe make a difference if he applies himself. So I think that's how I got started. Just first of all out of a curiosity, and then secondly, just it seems like if I have these questions, there must be someone else also having those questions, right? That was always my intuition in both Central Asia and seaweed, and that turned out to be correct. That I think it's not because it's not talked about or you don't see anything or nobody else has done it before you that it's just a bad idea. And so maybe it's difficult to make something commercially viable out of it. That's the next challenge, but at least in terms of interest,
back to that for sure.
Yeah, I feel it's always been it always surprises me how people have reacted. So when it comes to Central Asia, I can say that I do know a lot now. I've been doing that for 10 years. So yes, I can say I'm an expert there. For seaweed, I'm learning, So I've been really amazed at how much positive response I've gotten in the past 2 years, seeing how I'm also just sort of trying to figure this thing out.
How would you describe the differences between that particular traveling community that you've been interacting with and the seaweed community? Are there any similarities, other than obviously being a very new, I suppose, small niche?
Yeah, I'd say, well, it's pretty different, right? So cycle tourists in Tajikistan are not exactly sort of entrepreneurs in seaweed, or although I have met already my first sort of link, someone who I first met in Central Asia, who then recently started with a seaweed textile company in China. So
really,
there are overlaps, funnily enough. But yeah, I think, let's say, what would be
I suppose to buy you some time. One thing that I was thinking about was the seaweed industry. Obviously, I don't know the traveling community in Central Asia, but the seaweed industry is very much a collaborative and open to talk and share ideas and share challenges and help each other. Have you noticed that in the traveling communities as well? Was that something that you've sort of seen?
Well, it's a very good point. Let's say that I've approached it in the same manner, in the sense that I've always felt that information should be free as much as possible, and so my theory for writing the travel guides was always okay, I'll just throw all this information out there for free, and then we'll see how we can monetize it through some additional services. And with seaweed, I also felt like everyone's sort of all on their own little island, everyone's busy, so they don't really have the time to sort of look outside and see what's going on there. And even if they would have the time, it's just very difficult to find that information, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in Central Asia, you had the same issue that nobody really knew how to get a visa for Turkmenistan, somebody might write something on a forum how they did it, but then by the time you read it, it's already outdated again. So it really felt kind of similar in that sense that there was a huge need for information in seaweed, similar to when I arrived here in Kazakhstan 10 years ago. And yeah, I just felt like, let me just toss things out, get all that free information out, and then you see people reacting and they start contributing themselves and like, oh, you got this wrong, here's a bit of extra information. So yeah, that's how we all get wiser, right? Is the
Absolutely, yeah.
people yeah, adding in their own information. So I
Okay.
think that's mainly how I see myself, is more as a curator, right? There is so much out there, but you gotta find it, right? And I'm just
Yeah.
here to curate it, put it all together in a nice little package, and then because yeah, most of this is it's other people generating all this knowledge, whether it's travel knowledge or seaweed knowledge.
Yeah.
I'm just here to sort of put it all together and spread it out amongst a bigger crowd, get the
Yeah.
flow of information running faster.
Thanks for that. I made a couple of notes which I'll come back to, because before I wanted to take a tiny step back and ask you, what is Phyconomy?
What is Phyconomy? Yeah, it's a good question. I also ask myself that question regularly, like what is it? What is it supposed to be? So I guess the mission of Phyconomy is indeed to just, get the data and the information that people in the seaweed industry need to make up their own mind, to make sort of data-backed decisions, yeah, to get that to them. So I felt like it is this huge gap of information, and they have all the questions. Some people are already, so that they're going for it, and they're making gambles, because you have to say it's a gamble often, because there isn't enough information out there to make a decision based on actual like data, like we know this and this, so then we conclude that. You gotta sort of really go with your intuition for a lot of things, or sort of dreams, like, yeah, I have a vision, in 10 years we're going to be there. But so there's a huge lack of information. This past couple of days, been trying to find like harvest figures for cultivation for different places, and it's a struggle, right? So I think that's kind of really my main thing, is to get as much information out there. And so how that's supposed to look like, I haven't really figured it out, but I'd say that's my main mission.
So obviously, it sounds like the main drive behind you founding Phyconomy was to help fill this gap in information, right?
Mm-hmm.
What sort of information do you feel the industry is particularly lacking now? Is it scientific information? Is it business related information? Practical? All of the above?
Yeah, I'd say probably all of the above, but like scientific information, let's say there is a lot of science being done, or there can always be more
Mm-hmm.
science, of course. But yeah, I think for the scientists who need that information, they can find it. And when it comes to the sort of practical information, how to start a kelp farm, I think you have Green Wave, you have the Seaweed Academy, etc. So there are
Yeah.
good initiatives working on that. So I decided to focus on the economics, for the people who are thinking like, oh, should I invest in seaweed? Does that make sense? So that's where the economy part of Phyconomy comes from. Yes, so this kind of business intelligence, what's going on, who is doing what companies are sort of starting out, are they doing well, are they doing badly? And so I think this, before I started the database, let's say, I think there was a real lack of oversight. So just by bringing all of those companies together in the database, I think that's already been really helpful for a lot of people
Oh yeah.
to
I'm
see,
I'm one
like,
of them. I was gonna say this later, but I'll say it now. I need to thank you for what you're doing, and that database is one of the things that, for example, for me has been useful a few times, just recently. In fact, one of the listeners contacted me recently asking about seaweed companies and projects going on in a particular area of Europe,
Mm-hmm.
and I felt like I didn't really have an answer. But then I was doing the research for this interview, and I'm like, oh, this is it. You know, it's all here, and it's a nice way to put it all together in one place. So I think, yeah, thanks for that. I think it was really great work that you've done there. Very useful.
Yeah, so I keep updating it. So the work is not done there. I feel like there are still a lot of gaps, a lot of things I don't know yet, especially in places, let's say outside of Europe, US, I think Africa, I'm also quite good, but like South America,
Mm.
places like India, etc. And then of course, China, Japan, South Korea. I don't speak those languages. They're not. These people don't contact me. They don't know about me. So
Hmm.
I gotta really go there and find out. And I haven't been able to yet.
It's interesting how these, on the surface, separate planets seem to be struggling to interact. The West sort of seaweed industry and the Eastern seaweed
Hmm.
industry. There seems to be, I don't know if this is just my impression or whether something that you can relate to, but there seems to be a more separation that it would make sense there to be.
Yeah. No. I think it's definitely interesting. It's definitely my, let's say, my next goal is to find out more what's going on there. So I
Mm.
would really love to travel there this year and talk to people and understand, like from their side, I can understand, that they already have an established seaweed industry. That what these people in Europe, what are they going to teach us? They don't have a seaweed industry. Okay, they're trying, but so I can see it from their side. From the Western perspective, I don't really know what's stopping people. And maybe it's, I mean, of course, it's often different species. It's maybe people are not so keen to give up information
Hmm.
as to how their business works. Things are different, of course, and so I do understand it. And then, especially when you go into the product side, you have to invent those things yourself. But yeah, I do feel like there are things we can learn from each other for sure. So yeah, I'm keen to connect those different worlds more. Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, just going back for a second to the lack of information. Do you feel there is possibly a general lack of educational content?
How do you mean educational content?
I'm sort of thinking differentiated information that would be useful to practitioners of the industry from educational information, as in something that will be useful for people that are not at that level yet, people that are coming in that don't
Mm,
have an academic background, that don't
mm,
have, with seaweed being so specific and relatively new in the West, I get the feeling that there is a lot of interest and a lot of people trying to get into the
mm,
industry, but they're lacking the information to
mm.
establish themselves, to start something
Yes.
in an informed way.
Yeah.
To get them up to speed, and for example, in terms of starting a business, or getting into farming, or any of the other
Mm.
areas.
Yes. No, I get you. And so I've also thought about this to write this kind of a Seaweed 101 guide. I haven't had the time for it, but yeah, basically this idea, because you have, let's say, people read something in the New York Times or the Guardian or whatever, or they listen to a podcast and they go, oh, seaweed, yeah, that's amazing. Let me get into it. And then there's this huge gap between
Exactly.
that article that they read and then the science that is very difficult to understand unless you happen to have a degree in that very niche topic. And so I think yeah, in between there is like a big opportunity to just summarize what we know right now when it comes to, for instance, the carbon debate, processing, what's the current state of the industry, right? What are people struggling with right now? What are the technologies they're using, etc. And when it comes to the different products, I think yeah, there is definitely room for this kind of educational guide, and then providing like a bunch of links. If you've read this here, here, and here, this is where you can learn more.
Yeah.
So
Get a bit
that's kind
deeper.
of exactly, yeah. So that's then you can send them off into the niche literature. So, but this general overview also, I think, especially for investors, people who are trying to raise money, have complained to me on several occasions that for every new investor, they have to start basically from scratch. And that these people don't know anything about seaweed, which is normal. But it's like it takes a long time to get them up to a level where they can actually make an informed decision, and so that takes up a lot of their time, right? And so yeah, I think I can make their life perhaps a little bit easier by sort of providing this Seaweed 101 guide. So that's yeah, that's definitely a thing to do still. Yeah.
What sort of formats have you considered when starting Phyconomy?
Yeah, well, I'm a writer, so I don't know how to do a podcast. I don't know how to do videos. So I only ever considered. I mean, let's say the database is a database, so that's that also just that made sense to do it in that format. Beyond that, I think writing's the best way. Also because there is a lot of information out there already, but it's often sort of hidden in PDFs. As people make this like amazing reports for the World Bank or some other big institution, and then they launch it, it sort of floods social media for a week, and then 1 or 2 years down the line, it just gets lost in the internet, and so I feel like my duty is to sort of get all the nuggets, all the diamonds out of those reports, and then just sort of put them back into an article and make it more Googleable.
Yeah.
So because I do feel like a lot of information is already out there. It just takes you ages to find it all, It's,
Yeah.
and then for the information that isn't yet out there on the internet, it's yeah, it's key to just sort of interview those people, extract all of that information out of their heads, and then just stick it onto a web page and yeah, make it Googleable. So that's kind of my modus operandi, let's say. Yeah.
Do you feel it's a bit of a case of separating the signal from the noise?
Exactly. So that's when I said that I see myself more as a curator or like a
Yeah.
librarian, trying to just categorize it, put it all in the right place, and make it easy for people to find what they need.
Who do you see as your customers?
Well, I don't have any customers, let's say, in the sense that there's nobody paying me to do this. So I mean, I started a database just as kind of like a lockdown hobby in late 2020, and then I got a grant from ClimateWorks Foundation to really make it a lot bigger and better, and make it as big as it is now. And then the past year, I did some consulting. So people reached out to me and said like, "Oh, do you want to help us answer some questions?" So, but when it comes to readers, I guess it's a mix of the people who already are very much into the seaweed industry. So when it comes to the newsletter, I'd say it's mostly seaweed industry insiders, and then coupled with people who are just trying to figure it out. Like, is this something for me? Does this make sense? And so people from the outside looking in, trying to educate themselves. So I'd say it's a mix of those two.
So at the moment, what is the main area of focus for you, if there is one, in terms of running Phyconomy and creating new content? Have you got a
Well, right now
specific?
I'm writing my sort of state of the industry.
Uh-huh.
So I'm just trying to visualize the data that I sort of put into the database over the past year, and summarizing some of the trends. So yeah, trying to communicate so what I see as positive or negative signals
Mm-hmm.
in the seaweed industry. And yeah, I think what we just talked about is keeping the database up to date, and maybe writing this Seaweed Guide 101. I think those would be really cool to establish. And then besides that, trying to build out a network of people in Asia. So I think that's where there's a lot of knowledge that isn't really common knowledge yet in Europe and US. So I'd love to meet those people and talk to them and hear what I can learn from them.
That's interesting. So in terms of where you see Phyconomy going forward, how is it going to evolve? Do you feel
Yeah.
it is it a case of looking at the east, or how do you see it evolve in the future?
It's an excellent question. So I don't really know, to be honest. So it's
Yeah.
I didn't start out with a business model, and I think it's like with my travel guide for Central Asia. I also just started it, so I'm very bad at business. So I was lucky that I also am married. I have a wife, and she said like, well, you gotta make some money somehow. So let me
Yeah,
let me take care of that, because you're just I can see you're a dreamer, and it's nice, but we
yeah,
gotta put some
gotta
bread
make
on the
some
table.
money.
So
Yeah.
she took care of that with the travel guide, and so now I'm thinking. So on the one hand, the people ask me for consulting, so that's good. It's you can earn some money with that. But on the other hand, these kind of consulting assignments, they stay private, so I would prefer all of the information that I dig up to be just open, out in the open. So that's how do you make information free while at the same time getting paid? So
Mm.
I haven't really found a solution yet, but I'm not in a terrible hurry. So I'm just going to continue working on it in the naive idea that something will fall out of the air.
Quick one, guys. I wanted to let you know about the new Inside Seaweed newsletter. Would you like to get a super short email from me every month with 3 actionable insights for your seaweed business? I will search the seaweed industry for the most important lessons, the most useful conclusions, and relevant actions, condensed into a half page that I will share with you each month. It's really easy to sign up and just as easy to cancel. So if you'd like to give it a try, head over to insideseaweed.com. There's no lack of buzz around seaweed at the moment. I think
Mm-hmm.
we can agree on that. But the topic that has come up recently, and to quote Brand Smith, is the need to move away from a community of passion and step into a community of practice,
Mm-hmm.
or in the words of Joost Wouter, a step toward more professionalism, which sort of
Mm-hmm.
links in very well with what you just said, and this sort of being a dreamer and wanting to put in all this information and out to the world and put in all this effort to make this happen. But at what point does it become, or maybe another way to put it is, are we at a point where we are ready to switch to step it up to a professional, almost like a business? So with
Mm.
that in mind, do you think we're at a point where a business based on content creation, knowledge, information around seaweed, such as
Mm.
Phyconomy, can be viable and can be taken seriously as a professional service? Or are we still at a sort of hobby niche type stage?
No, I think definitely there's a lot of people who have an interest, who have questions. So anyone who can offer like a professional analysis, they will be in demand. So I think there's definitely room for courses. You see like the Seaweed Academy, etc.
Yeah.
These are basically they're just providing information, right? So I think there's a lot of need for that. Yeah, especially at this point. It's like you said, there's so much interest. People just really can't find the information they need. So if you can package that up nicely, then for sure, yeah.
Yeah. You think at this point the seaweed niche is big enough to make some of these business ventures viable?
Yes, I do think so. To a certain extent, of course. This is not the oil and gas business, and so all of
Yeah.
these startups they don't have money to burn. Everybody's losing money anyway. So when it comes to if you're looking for like sponsorships or things like that, no, probably not.
Not
But
quite. Yeah.
if it's just like something at a smaller scale where people just pay you to find them to give them the information they need. Yes, I think there's definitely a need for that. Both you get those questions from private persons or people who want to do a startup, etc., as well as from investors, as well as
Yeah.
from large corporate companies who also have an interest, and
Hmm.
they have money, they can pay. So I would say yes, there are definitely opportunities.
Yeah. So it sounds like at this stage, a professional service would be more around one-to-one consulting and that sort of
Yeah, let's say
that sort of
that's
thing.
what I've seen so far.
Yeah.
That yes.
Okay. That's really interesting. Is there anything you wish you had known before you started Phyconomy?
Well, that's a bit of a trick question since I knew absolutely nothing. So I mean, you could say like, "Oh, I
So
wish I knew
yeah.
everything," but that was the whole point of it, right? I don't know
Yeah.
anything, but I'm curious. And I think that's it's one of my my best qualities is the fact that I am curious, and that sort of gets me into these kind of things. So it's a journey, and it's just every day's full of discoveries. I'm learning new things every day. Yeah, I guess I've mostly just been surprised. Like I thought that I'll just do this and I'll put that out there, but I didn't expect to really get so much feedback and reaction, and that people
Mm.
actually. I thought people would say, "Who's this guy?" But instead they thought like, "No, thank you. Do you have more?" So that's been very surprising. So yeah, I feel I really overachieved in that sense. So
That's brilliant, yeah.
yeah, it's been only pleasant surprises mostly. Yeah.
Did you promote Phyconomy in any significant way, or did it just organically create interest?
Yeah, I wrote posts on LinkedIn in the beginning, quite
Yeah.
a few. Now I do a lot less, and same for Twitter. I write on Twitter. That's kind of it. Yeah. So
So not a huge amount, and still
no.
it generated some interest.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think I was the first to sort of be interested in seaweed without
Mm-hmm.
being an entrepreneur or a biologist or an engineer or a chemist or anything like that. Just someone who comes from a communications background. So I guess that's yeah, that was needed. Huh?
And you mentioned communication. That's exactly what I wanted to go with this, because we often, particularly in this podcast, but in general, I suppose we often focus on the technical side of seaweed, and
Mm-hmm.
boy, is there a lot to talk about. But at the
Mm.
same time, something I would like to focus on with you, if you're happy to, is to discuss a bit more of communication, because I'm thinking many of the listeners will be in the position of wanting to communicate the values of seaweed,
Mm.
engage potential customers, create a brand around seaweed, or promote a product, for example. What is the story that you think is most powerful in capturing people's attention and drawing them into seaweed related topics?
Well, that's a good question. I don't really know. I think there's been, like you said, a lot of buzz around seaweed. Like, oh, seaweed's so amazing. It's healthy. It can draw down carbon, phosphorus, nitrogen. It's good for all the animals that live inside, etc., etc. So I think that's like a clear story. It does need fertilizer, all these type of things. I guess I'm more sort of on the other side where I want to take that apart and say, okay, that's there, but you know how like it's not going to save the planet. First of all, because the planet doesn't need saving. Planet's doing fine. Secondly, because these things. It's not just one thing that's so I think any type of narrative that is too sort of just positive, like, oh, this is something amazing, you're just setting yourself up for disaster, right? Because sooner or later there will be more negative press, and then you sort of have nothing and no legs to stand on. So I'd say I'm really more, let's be realistic about it and say like, okay, these are good things, but they're whatever you're doing, there are also negative impacts, and like, okay, we're saying that this we want to grow all the seaweed, but is it realistic to are we able to grow that much seaweed, or is that even good to grow if we're thinking of growing that much seaweed, right? And so yeah, I guess my take is to be realistic without being unnecessarily pessimistic. So I think there's also a certain brand of social media commentator, usually a sort of man in their 50s who's seen the last seaweed hype, seaweed bubble in the 70s. And there's sort of, I don't know, maybe just spiteful that people are younger these days and that they also want to do something interesting. But they're just sometimes negative base, also baseless. So I think there's a certain positivity that is exaggerated and that is not rooted in fact. And the same for some people's pessimism, which is also just not based on facts, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, I know precisely what you mean.
I'd like to just sort of stand in the middle and communicate things based on like, okay, these are actual facts and I can show you. Here's the evidence. And then, yeah, here's if there are no sort of clear evidences, at least you can sort of say like, okay, this person says A, this person says B. I'll leave it up to you
Yeah,
to make up your own mind. But yeah, I guess I'm really trying to position myself in the middle and give people the tools to make up their own mind And yeah, I think that's also something that I learned from writing about travel in Central Asia, in the
Now
sense
there you
that
go. It is coming back.
yeah, in the sense that well, I started off as a penniless backpacker. So those were the people that I was writing for, other backpackers. And then I had to sort of change tack, or sort of become more inclusive, since other people also started to find my website. People who had more money, who wanted to travel in a different way, and that's it. And so, and then yeah, I had to sort of write, instead of like, oh, this place is shit, I had to write like, well, older people who have more money and who are more interested into cultural travel, they like these places, whereas younger people who are more into adventure, etc., they like other places. So I think that's the kind of approach I want to take here as well, is just to look at things from as many angles as possible. And so if you ask me, what's the right story, I think that's always the right story. Had to be as nuanced as possible. It's never black and white. It's always many shades of gray.
Yeah, I fully agree. So you probably answered this in a way already, but let's see if there's more. Do you feel you have a set of criteria to decide whether a piece of news is worthy of going into Phyconomy or into the newsletter? And it might be that we're back to the, well, it needs to be factual and that sort of thing. I was wondering if there's any other sort of set of criteria that sort of guide you into choosing, because you said it yourself, there's so much there. How do you pick the good stuff?
Yes, yeah, no, that's an interesting question. So how do you decide, right? So I think it changes as I learn more. I think just in general, once you start to understand something better, you become better at understanding. Okay, this is unimportant. This is actually more important. That you're able to understand the context around it better, right? And I think for me, that's mainly like when I write a newsletter, I'm always thinking, how can I sort of tell a story that these are not just sort of data points drifting in space, but how can I make it into a story that's sort of pointing towards a bigger trend rather than just events. So yeah, that's what I'm always trying to do, to gather up some different things that all seem to point in the same direction. That's what I'm aiming for.
I'm gonna switch gear and ask you about something that I actually ask a lot of the guests, probably everybody. But in your case, throughout your learning journey in seaweed, what has been the biggest frustration for you, if there is anything?
Well, I guess it's yeah, trying to find the facts. It's not necessarily a frustration, since I sort of consider it my job, let's say, but that it is still so difficult to find out some, like really basic things, like what is the price of this or that seaweed in this or that place. That's like you're going on a journey, right? Okay, can I ask you? Can I? Oh, it's really not so easy to find these types of, yeah, really rather basic things, and so there is a lot of secrecy. On the other hand, there's also a lot of openness from some people. So, but yeah, sometimes you think like, is that really necessary to be secretive about these things? So yeah, I mean, it's all opportunities to build something, to get that information out in the open. But at other times, yeah, you do sort of waste all the time doing things that in other industries are just a mouse click away.
Do you feel that sort of in a way validates your mission? It makes you
Yeah,
relevant.
yeah, I think so. If somebody else already did it, then if it would be one mouse click away, then there's no more work for me. So then I can just
Yeah,
retire and go do something else.
yeah. You said something interesting, and this may be unrelated, but you said, staying a little bit more on the frustration side of things, and the sort of
Hmm.
obstacles and challenges. You said something interesting in an interview that I've read or listened to, that in some countries it's easier to start drilling for oil than it is to start farming seaweed. Do you feel that is where you would start in terms of making changes and looking for solutions?
Uh-huh. Yes. So I don't know if that is actually true. And
It
so let's
sounds
use it
great
as
though. I
a
mean,
as a metaphor. And
yeah.
so I heard someone else say that, and I repeated that. So I wouldn't necessarily say that it's I don't know how the oil and gas licensing works, but we know about seaweed. Yes, it's challenging, right, to get licenses, and they're working on it, but it's still a long way to go. And yes, for sure, that's difficult. So I think, you know, when you talk about bottlenecks, there's just it's everywhere you look, right? It's regulation, cost is simply too high. There's this market gap in the sense that we're growing kelps, but what people actually want to use is dulse and sea lettuce. And then there's the social license issue, which isn't an issue yet, but you can see it coming in the next few years. If seaweed farms get bigger, then
Yeah.
people will start complaining.
Do you see that as an obstacle for the
Absolutely.
potential exponential growth of seaweed industry?
Absolutely, yeah. You see that with salmon, and there's really no difference, in my opinion. Yeah, I think for seaweed it's going to be the same thing. And people will complain about they're already doing that. Are there some boys in the bay? We don't want that here. It just spoils the view. So social license is a big thing that I think people do worry about it, but perhaps not enough yet. And I think that there are sort of really interesting sort of things happening. There's this Fed by Blue project trying to get people to understand the benefits of aquaculture. There's some other people making documentaries, etc. But it's gonna be a battle for sure.
Do you think the arguments are good in terms of, you know, in terms of getting that acceptance from the public? Do you think the seaweed industry has got good arguments to? Is a case of passing the message across, or?
Yeah, in my opinion, these type of things is not necessarily always about logical arguments. It's more
Oh yeah.
about emotion. Did you get these people involved from the very start? Did you talk to them? Did you make connections? So, you know, did you invite them over to see like this is what's going on and this is how that's going to look like? So I think it's really important to do that. So, but yeah, so if you say like where to start, should you start with the regulations, or should you start with making it cheaper to grow seaweeds or easier to process seaweeds? Yeah, you have to try and do all of those things at once, and so that's why it's going to take a while to really grow it. I am still, after 2 years, a seaweed believer. I do see it continuing to grow and at a certain point exponentially, but that might take a bit longer than some people might be hoping for.
You wrote a report called State of the Industry 2023. Would you like to share the main conclusions from that?
For me, yeah, that you do see like a strong rise in the growth of the seaweed industry in Alaska and Maine. And if you look at Europe, there is also growth, but it is slower. And I think that's really interesting to observe. Also, if you look at investments, Europe has a lot more startups, and so there are also more deals in Europe, but the checks are smaller. Whereas US, you have fewer companies, but they get bigger investments. So I think that those are interesting trends that to observe, and then yeah, we'll see what comes out of that in a couple of years' time. It's all still very early stage, and most of these deals are seed stage. So we'll have to wait a decade to find out which of these companies will make it.
Yeah, no, that's very wise. What is, just to put our positive hat on, since you sort of label yourself a dreamer, so let's be dreamers for a second. What is the topic or opportunity that you're most excited about for the future, the
Hmm.
near future, I suppose?
Well, the near future. Well, I think what makes seaweeds so interesting is that there are so many applications, right? And so I think, you know, well, we do need to get biorefineries going, because they will unlock the possibility of getting of serving all of those applications and using up 100% of the biomass, which is still at the moment a bit of a pipe dream in most cases. So yeah, I'd say biorefining is really important. And then yeah, there's so many opportunities. Let's say that the biggest ones are probably bioplastics, but also food. I think yeah, it would be great if people eat more seaweeds, and I can really see it if I just sort of look at what my grandfather eats. He's in his 90s now, and what I eat 2 generations down the line. There's very little overlap. You know, he was in his 20s when he first saw a bell pepper, and when we first saw a paprika. So, this so many changes have happened in our diet over the past 50 years. I really don't see a reason why seaweeds can't become a very normal part of our diets in the way
Yeah.
that, 15 years ago, I'd never seen an avocado in my life, or this
Oh
wasn't
yeah.
like a
Yeah.
common thing. And so, yeah, I think food is definitely something that's coming. Yeah, I do believe in that as well. And basically, I think if we look at seaweeds, the opportunity that they bring is that it's more than just it's good for the ocean, or it's a biomass that isn't detrimental for soils, but also that it can really help countries achieve their net zero goals in all over the world. So not only in Europe and US, but especially in tropical countries where it gets very difficult with depleted soils. I think seaweed biostimulants can also really help there. Maybe in the future, hydrochar, who knows? And so, yeah, so many opportunities really there. Yeah.
So in that vein, looking at all these opportunities, knowing what you've come to understand through the learning that you've done, if you were to give advice to somebody wanting to start a business in the seaweed industry, would you encourage them to focus on a particular area? I'm thinking, farming and processing, manufacturing of value added product, services for the industry.
Yeah.
Yeah, what sort of path would you recommend?
Yeah, it's a good question because I mean, like it's everything's needed, right? As we need proper processing. There's a huge gap. Nobody really knows how to, at least if you're looking at like Europe, North America, how to process large amounts of seaweeds. So I don't know. That's a difficult one because there's people making textiles or paints out of seaweeds. So why would I not advise them to do perhaps that? So yeah, well, no, I think that's a difficult one for me to answer since
No,
I'm
that's
so
absolutely fine. Don't worry about it.
I'm so not a business person, but yeah, I'll leave that open to people's imagination because yeah, I think you can look at every part of the value chain and see possibilities to do something there. So yeah, it really depends on your particular angle.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's the beauty of it, that there's so much opportunities for innovation and for contribution that virtually anybody can have something to offer, depending on their background and their angle, their inclination and aspirations.
Exactly. Even a travel writer can do something.
That's excellent. Steven, this has been great. Thank you so much for taking the time. And like I said, for the work that you're doing. Is there anything else that you would like to add at all?
No, let's leave it here. I mean, I have a lot of things to add, but yeah, I like to do that in my own pace. I write it all down, and
Yeah.
people can read it in the newsletter or on the website, and so that's how I prefer to speak. Just I construct my own narrative, and then I'll hear what people have to say about it if they like it or not. So, but yeah, I'll continue doing that.
So to point the audience then, you guys can find out more about Phyconomy at phyconomy.net, where you can also join the newsletter. What's the frequency does that come out?
Yeah, every 3 weeks. That's a good frequency for me at the moment. Every 2 weeks is like, oh, then I need to hurry up every month, and it's a bit then it's a bit too little. So that's where I'm at the moment.
Anything else, Steven? You were saying LinkedIn?
Yeah, people can find me there. I try not to visit too much, but it's a great source of information for finding out about the seaweed industry in general. If you're really new to seaweed, at least like that's where I learned a lot in the beginning, is in just following people who have a seaweed company, and it's a good place to learn. Yeah,
Fantastic. Thanks again, Steven.
you're welcome.
And thank you guys for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. And until next time, take care.